Have you ever had the feeling that you're living someone else's life? That your every step follows a script you didn't write, applauding a hero who doesn't represent you? We worship the light, order, success. But in the silence of the night, another voice whispers. A voice that laughs at our certainties, that feels a secret pleasure in the king's stumble, that yearns for a touch of chaos to break the suffocating monotony of perfection. This voice is not your enemy. It is the oldest and wisest part of you, the energy the world tried to silence, but which refuses to die. This is the voice of the trickster, the divine trickster who dwells in your unconscious. He is the best-kept secret of your soul, the key to your liberation, and at the same time, the force you fear most, because he knows a truth that your ego refuses to accept, that your greatest prison is not the world outside, but the perfect order you have built within. And the only way to break free is to hand the key to your cell to the most dangerous and brilliant prisoner of all, yourself in your purest and wildest form. What we will do here in the next few minutes is not a lecture. It is a ritual of invocation, a journey into the catacombs of your own psyche to find, face, and dance with your inner trickster. If you are looking for easy answers or comfort, this video is not for you. But if you are ready to break the mirrors and see the face that hides behind all your masks, then your place is here. To ensure you don't miss a single step of this descent, subscribe now and turn on all notifications. This is not just a channel. It is a refuge for those who know that true wisdom flourishes in paradox. Leave a like as a sign, a pact that you are ready to embrace your shadow, and comment with the word rupture if you feel, at this very moment, the call to break an old structure in your life. The journey begins now. There will be no turning back. From our first breath, we are plunged into an ocean of rules, a complex system of expectations that subtly shapes who we believe we are. Family, school, religion, culture, they all operate as architects of a consensual reality. A grand theater where everyone is given a role to play. The role of the good son, the exemplary student, the productive citizen, the hero of our own story. The script is clear. Follow the lines, obey the signs, build a stable, predictable, and above all, orderly life. The promise is tempting. If you follow the map, you will find the treasure of happiness, security, and acceptance. But this is the most seductive and dangerous lie ever told. Order, when taken to the extreme, is not a path to life. It is a synonym for death. It is the rigidity of a corpse as opposed to the chaotic flexibility of a living body. The human psyche is not a machine designed for linear efficiency, but a wild, pulsating, and contradictory ecosystem. By forcing it to fit into a box of logic and predictability, we are not optimizing it. We are mutilating it. The depression, anxiety, and feelings of emptiness and meaninglessness that haunt our modern era are not flaws in the system. They are the symptoms of a system that has failed our soul. They are the cries of everything that has been repressed in the name of order, instinct, passion, anarchic creativity, doubt, the shadow. The trickster archetype emerges in this scenario not as a villain, but as a doctor of the soul. He is the fever that indicates the infection, the earthquake that shakes the rotten foundations of a structure that no longer serves us. He personifies the inconvenient truth that control is an illusion. We do not control life, love, or death. The attempt to do so only generates suffering, a constant tension against the natural flow of the universe, which is, in its essence, a flow of creative chaos. The trickster invites us to let go of the reins, to laugh at our own arrogance in believing we could map the infinite. He shows us that true security is not in building higher walls, but in learning the art of navigating uncertainty, of dancing in the storm. His presence in our dreams, in our slips of the tongue, in our acts of self-sabotage, is a call to awakening, a reminder that real, pulsating, meaningful life is not in the safe center of our controlled kingdom, but on the wild, unknown frontiers where rules dissolve and everything becomes, once again, dangerously possible. To accept the trickster is to accept our totality, to admit that we are made of both light and darkness, order and chaos. It is the first and most courageous step to leave the invisible prison and begin living the life that is authentically ours, with all its glorious and terrifying imperfections. Who is, after all, this entity that refuses to be categorized? The trickster is the archetype of the threshold, the boundary, the in-between places. He belongs neither to the heaven of the gods nor to the earth of men, but moves between all worlds, carrying messages, breaking rules, and shuffling the cards of fate. His nature is ambiguity. He is, at the same time, creator and destroyer, wise and foolish, divine and bestial. Carl Jung identified him as an archaic figure of the psyche, a precursor to the savior hero, representing a still undifferentiated level of consciousness that chaotically unites opposites. He is the living memory of the primordial chaos from which everything emerged. One of his central characteristics is being a boundary crosser. He violates all taboos, not out of inherent malice, but because his function is to question the validity of the very boundaries that define our reality, the boundary between the sacred and the profane, man and animal, life and death, the serious and the comical. In doing so, he injects new energy into stagnant systems and opens the possibility of new configurations. Hermes, the Greek messenger with his winged feet, is the perfect image of this mobility, connecting Olympus, the world of the dead, and the earth. Another fundamental trait is his astute and subversive intelligence. The trickster rarely uses brute force. His weapon is the word, deception, cunning metas. For the Greeks, he is the master of language, able to use double meanings, irony, and lies to unmask a greater truth. He exposes the hypocrisy and stupidity of the powerful not through direct confrontation, but by manipulating the system's own rules against it. He teaches us that the most profound change often comes from intelligent subversion, not frontal opposition. Humor is his domain. The trickster is the god of laughter, especially the laughter that emerges from the absurd, the unexpected, the shattering of a solemn expectation. This laughter is sacred, for it has the power to relativize the absolute. It makes us step back from our personal tragedies and the ego's drama, allowing us to see the situation from a broader, almost divine perspective. To laugh at oneself is the supreme act of integrating the trickster, a sign that the ego is no longer in absolute control of the psyche. Psychologically, the trickster is closely linked to the function of the shadow. He personifies the traits, desires, and impulses that the conscious ego rejects as immoral, childish, or socially unacceptable. However, his energy is not purely shadow. He is also a culture bringer, a fire thief like Prometheus, who steals knowledge from the gods and gives it to humanity, often accidentally or as a byproduct of his mischief. He is the catalyst for innovation, as every new invention or radical idea begins as a heresy, a breaking of established rules. To understand the face of the trickster is, therefore, to understand the paradoxical nature of the psyche itself. It is to recognize that growth is not linear, and that healing often comes from where we least expect it, from error, from deviation, from a joke, from transgression. He is the promise that even in our most chaotic and repressed parts lies a spark of creative genius and liberating wisdom. The trickster archetype is universal, proof that its function in the human psyche transcends culture and time. Each mythology has woven its own mask for this energy, revealing distinct facets of its complexity. In Norse mythology, we find Loki, perhaps the darkest and most complex of tricksters. Born of giants, but living among the gods of Asgard, he is the ultimate outsider, the agent of chaos whose ambiguity makes him both a helper and the architect of the gods' final destruction, Ragnarok. Loki is a shapeshifter, changing form and gender, symbolizing the fluidity of identity and the instability of reality. His actions, like cutting Sif's golden hair or fathering monstrous creatures, seem purely malicious, but they often force the gods to obtain new treasures or confront their own vulnerabilities. Loki represents the trickster in his most dangerous facet, the shadow that, when ignored for too long, becomes actively destructive, reminding us that the repression of chaos has a terrible price. In Greece, we have Hermes, the divine messenger, patron of thieves, merchants, and travelers. From his birth, he demonstrates his nature while still an infant. He steals the sacred cattle of his brother Apollo and invents the lyre to appease him. Hermes is not malevolent, he is amoral. Governed by a brilliant curiosity and intelligence, he is the god of crossroads, the psychopomp who guides souls to the underworld, showing his mastery in crossing all boundaries. Psychologically, Hermes represents the function of communication, synchronicity, and the ability to connect different parts of the psyche, the conscious and the unconscious. He is the spark of inspiration, the sudden idea that solves an unsolvable problem, the insight that emerges when we relax the ego's control. In Yoruba and Afro-Brazilian traditions, this energy manifests in Exu. Exu is the Orisha of communication, the guardian of the crossroads, the messenger between humans Aya and the gods Oran. Nothing can be done without him. Exu is the personification of movement, dynamics, the principle of exchange and transformation. He is often misunderstood as a devilish figure, but this is a distortion. Exu is the lord of paradox and contradiction. One of his stories tells how he walked between two friends wearing a hat that was red on one side and black on the other, causing a fight between them over the hat's color. By revealing the truth, he was not being cruel but teaching a profound lesson about the nature of perspective and relative truth. Exu forces us to confront ambiguity and to recognize that our view of reality is always partial. He is the energy that destabilizes in order to reorganize at a higher level. In the Americas, especially among native peoples, the figure of the coyote or the raven is prominent. The coyote is a being of immense appetite and cunning, but also of colossal stupidity. His stories are often hilarious, showing him being tricked by his own greed or curiosity. Yet, in the midst of his blunders, he ends up shaping the world, releasing the sun, or bringing fire to humanity. The coyote represents the raw, instinctual nature of the psyche, the animal impulse that, although clumsy and self-centered, is a powerful force of creation and change. He teaches us not to take ourselves so seriously and to find wisdom in failure. From Anansi, the spider storyteller in West Africa, to Sun Wukong, the monkey king in China, the pattern repeats. A marginal, chaotic, and cunning figure acts as an indispensable catalyst for change. To study these faces is to realize that the human psyche, everywhere, has recognized the vital need for a force that challenges authority, questions certainty, and keeps the universe in a state of constant creative flux. In every narrative of growth, whether personal or mythical, the central figure is the hero. He is the bearer of consciousness, the representative of the ego who sets out on a journey to defeat darkness, establish order, and bring a treasure back to the community. We admire his courage, his determination, his clarity of purpose. However, depth psychology, especially Jungian, warns us of a subtle and profound danger, the inflation of the heroic ego. When the ego completely identifies with the hero archetype, it begins to believe in its own infallibility and purity. It becomes rigid, one-sided, and dangerously blind to its own darkness. It is at this point that the trickster emerges, not as an external enemy to be defeated, but as the inevitable shadow of the hero himself. The trickster is everything the hero represses to maintain his virtuous self-image. If the hero is noble, the trickster is vulgar. If the hero is serious, the trickster is comical. If the hero follows a code of honor, the trickster exploits every loophole. They are two sides of the same coin, and the journey of individuation does not consist in eliminating the trickster, but in recognizing him as an integral part of oneself. The dynamic between them illustrates the principle of enantiodromia, the concept that any tendency taken to its extreme turns into its opposite. A hero who seeks absolute order ends up creating a tyranny, a dead order that suffocates life. It is the chaotic intervention of the trickster that prevents this from happening. He is the thorn in the hero's side, the constant reminder of his fallibility and humanity. He makes the hero stumble, exposes him to ridicule, sabotages his best-laid plans, forcing him to develop humility, flexibility, and a sense of humor. Think of the relationship between Sherlock Holmes, the hero of pure logic, and his dependence on vices and erratic behaviors, a trickster shadow that balances his excessive intellect. Or how, in the legends of King Arthur, the perfect order of Camelot is constantly challenged by magical, unpredictable, and amoral forces, like Morgana or Lancelot himself, whose passion a tricksterian force destroys the kingdom his heroism helped build. The hero wants to build a perfect system. The trickster exists to remind us that perfection is inhuman, and that life flourishes in imperfection. Psychologically, the ego hero needs the shadow trickster to become whole. The task is not to slay the dragon of chaos, but to learn to dance with it. When the hero's ego refuses to acknowledge its shadow, the trickster becomes more destructive. Acts of self-sabotage, the accidents that ruin our lives, the toxic relationships we are drawn to, these are often manifestations of an inner trickster desperate for attention, trying to shatter the facade of perfection the ego insists on maintaining. True heroic strength, therefore, is not in being invulnerable, but in having the courage to look at one's own shadow, to admit one's own contradictions, and to integrate the chaotic and creative energy of the trickster. The ultimate goal is not a kingdom of perpetual order, but a state of dynamic wholeness, where the light of consciousness and the creative darkness of the unconscious can coexist in a tense but fertile dialogue. The hero who has learned to laugh at himself is the one who has truly completed his journey. The psyche, like nature, seeks a state of dynamic equilibrium or homeostasis. However, in our lives, we often create an artificial and rigid balance. We build personas, adopt beliefs, and develop habits that, while they may have been useful at one time, eventually become a shell that prevents our growth. This is what psychology calls stagnation. Psychic energy ceases to flow, and we feel stuck, apathetic, depressed. We live in a cycle of neurotic repetitions, attracting the same problems, the same relationships, the same frustrations. It is like a river that has been dammed. The water becomes stagnant, murky, and lifeless. It is in this scenario of psychic paralysis that the function of the trickster reveals itself as fundamentally therapeutic. The trickster's energy operates as an agent of rupture. It is the unexpected event, the sudden crisis, the meaningful accident that breaks the dam and forces the energy to flow again. It can manifest as a layoff that forces us to reevaluate our career, the end of a relationship that compels us to confront our emotional dependency, or an illness that makes us rethink our lifestyle. At the moment, these events are perceived as catastrophic, an invasion of chaos into our ordered life. However, from the soul's point of view, they are necessary surgical interventions to save us from the slow death of stagnation. The trickster shatters the egoic structure so that something new can be born. He is the fool in the tarot, who walks towards the abyss not out of ignorance, but out of an intuitive trust in the life process. This process of rupture is painful because the ego fiercely resists the loss of control. The ego has built its identity and its sense of security based on these rigid patterns. The arrival of the trickster is felt as an annihilation. But what is being annihilated is not the self, the totality of our being, but only the ego's limited identification with a small part of who we are. It is the breaking of the vessel so that it can be remade more authentically. This function of rupture also operates on a micro level, day to day. The slip of the tongue that reveals a repressed truth during a conversation, the disturbing dream that exposes an ignored internal conflict, the joke that breaks unbearable tension. All are subtle manifestations of the trickster working to keep the psyche flexible and alive. He is the great de-automator, the one who takes us off autopilot and forces us to be present, to improvise, to find new answers to old questions. Therapy, in its essence, can be seen as a process of consciously inviting the trickster's energy into the therapeutic space. The therapist sometimes takes on this role, asking the unexpected question, pointing out the contradiction in the patient's discourse, using humor to disarm the ego's defenses. The goal is to create small cracks in the patient's neurotic fortress so that the light of consciousness can enter and the stagnant energy can be released. Therefore, learning to recognize and collaborate with the trickster's function of rupture is an essential psychological skill. It means cultivating an attitude of openness to the unexpected, developing the resilience to navigate crises, and above all, trusting that all chaos contains a hidden order, that every destruction is the prelude to a new creation. It is understanding that the soul is not healed by the addition of new certainties, but by the courageous subtraction of old and limiting structures. In a world that takes itself far too seriously, laughter is an act of rebellion, and the trickster archetype is the supreme master of this sacred rebellion. Humor, in its deepest form, is not just entertainment or comic relief. It is a psychological and spiritual tool of immense power. a form of intelligence that operates beyond linear logic. The trickster's laughter is the laughter that deflates the ego, that unmasks authority, and that reveals the truth through absurdity. One of the primary functions of this laughter is to relativize. The ego tends to absolutize our experiences, turning minor problems into epic tragedies and our opinions into universal truths. We live immersed in the drama of our own narrative. Trickster humor offers us a sudden leap in perspective. It allows us to see ourselves and our worries from a distance, as if we were watching a comedy. This momentary distance is liberating. It breaks the spell of self-importance and reminds us of our smallness and our connection to something much larger. Laughing at oneself, therefore, is not a sign of weakness, but of profound strength and psychological health. It is the ability to accept one's own imperfection, to embrace one's own shadow with lightness. Laughter is also a powerful tool for social and political criticism. The court jester was the only person in the kingdom who could speak the truth to the king without being beheaded. Hiding behind the mask of foolishness, he used satire, irony, and parody to expose the corruption, arrogance, and stupidity of power. The trickster, as the cosmic court jester, performs this same function in our psyche and our culture. Comedy, cartoons, memes, these are modern manifestations of the trickster's energy. Using humor to challenge dogmas, question the status quo, and give voice to those who have been silenced. Laughter breaks the enchantment of authority, for it is impossible to truly fear something or someone you are laughing at. Furthermore, humor is intrinsically linked to creativity. Both processes involve making unexpected connections between seemingly unrelated ideas or concepts. A joke works by breaking a logical pattern, through surprise, through sudden insight, exactly like a creative discovery. The trickster, by shuffling the established order, creates the fertile ground for new combinations and new possibilities to emerge. The ability to play with ideas, to not take the creative process too seriously and solemnly, is often the secret to overcoming blocks and accessing deeper levels of innovation. On a spiritual level, laughter can be an experience of transcendence. Zen Buddhism, for example, is filled with stories of monks who attain enlightenment through an absurd act or a spontaneous burst of laughter. This is the Satori laugh, a laughter that emerges from the sudden understanding of emptiness and the illusory nature of the ego. It is the expression of the pure joy that comes from freeing oneself from the shackles of conceptual thought. The trickster, like the unpredictable Zen master, shocks us out of our rational mind, leading us to a state of presence and direct perception. To integrate the sacred laughter of the trickster into our lives means, therefore, to cultivate a spirit of lightness and play. It means looking for the absurd in the solemn, the comedy in the tragedy. It is giving yourself permission to be foolish, to make mistakes, to not take yourself so seriously. It is understanding that the universe is much more like a cosmic dance or a divine joke than a mathematical problem to be solved. A belly laugh is, perhaps, the most honest prayer there is. It is crucial, in our journey to meet the trickster, not to romanticize the archetype. Like any powerful psychic force, it has a positive and a negative pole. Ignoring it leads to stagnation, but being possessed by it can lead to ruin. When the trickster's energy is not consciously integrated by the ego, it can manifest in purely destructive ways. The most common trap is identification with the negative trickster, which manifests as the cynic, the nihilist, or the chronic saboteur. The cynic uses the trickster's intelligence and humor not to reveal a greater truth, but to mock everything and everyone, devaluing any attempt to create meaning, beauty, or order. He hides behind a mask of intellectual superiority, but deep down, he is driven by fear and bitterness. The nihilist goes a step further, declaring that if all rules are arbitrary, then nothing matters, and the only logical response is destruction for destruction's sake. Another danger is when the trickster manifests as the narcissistic manipulator. This person uses the cunning, charm, and ability to read others' gifts of the trickster for purely selfish gain. He lies, deceives, and exploits the vulnerability of others without any remorse. He is the master of half-truths and gaslighting, scrambling reality to keep others confused and under his control. Here, the energy that should serve the psyche's liberation is co-opted to serve the pathological inflation of a fragile ego. This is the shadow of the trickster in its most toxic form, the charlatan who poses as a guru, the con artist who poses as a savior. Possession by the archetype can also lead to a behavior of chronic self-sabotage and irresponsibility. The person lives in a state of perpetual chaos, unable to maintain relationships, jobs, or commitments. They justify their lack of structure as being spontaneous or free, but in reality, they are a slave to their most childish impulses. The trickster, here, is not breaking rules to create something new. He is just breaking everything because he cannot handle the challenges and responsibilities of adult life. He becomes the puer aeternus, the eternal youth who refuses to grow up and embody his potential in the real world. So, how do we differentiate the creative trickster from the destroyer? The key lies in intent and outcome. The integrated trickster, even when causing disruption, serves a higher purpose of renewal and growth. His rupture is followed by a new form of order, more complex and conscious. The negative trickster, on the other hand, leads only to dissolution, isolation, and continuous suffering, both for the individual and for those around them. His freedom is a prison of meaningless chaos. The work of integration, therefore, requires discernment. It requires the ego to be strong enough to dialogue with this powerful energy without being overwhelmed by it. It means recognizing the impulse for rupture, but channeling it constructively. It means using humor to heal, not to harm. It means breaking the rules that imprison us, but honoring the structures that support us and connect us to others. It is the difference between the demolisher who makes way for a new building and the vandal who just spray paints the ruins. The trickster rarely announces his arrival with trumpets. His presence is subtle, insinuating, often disguised as chance or personal failure. Learning to read his signs is the first step toward consciously collaborating with this transformative energy, rather than becoming its victim. One of the most common signs is the experience of disruptive synchronicity. You are rigidly following your life plan when a series of meaningful coincidences begins to occur, diverting you from your course. You miss a flight and meet your future business partner at the airport. Your computer crashes, deleting a project you no longer believed in, forcing you to start something new. These are not mere accidents. They are interventions by the trickster, the master of fortuitous encounters and twists of fate, indicating that the path laid out by your ego is no longer aligned with the path of your soul. Another clear sign is the intensification of slips and Freudian slips. You find yourself saying exactly what you didn't mean to say at a crucial moment, revealing an inconvenient truth. You forget an important commitment that, deep down, you didn't want to attend. You lose an object that tied you to a past that needs to be left behind. Freud saw this as the emergence of the repressed. Jung would see it as the invisible hand of the trickster, using the cracks in our consciousness to leak the truth from the unconscious and sabotage the lies we tell ourselves. The repetition of self-sabotaging patterns is also a wake-up call. You are about to achieve a major goal and, inexplicably, you do something that ruins everything. This may seem like masochism, but it is often the inner trickster acting out of desperation. If the success you are pursuing represents a betrayal of your true nature, for example, a prestigious job that stifles your creative soul, the trickster will sabotage that success to save you from an inauthentic life. The sabotage, in this case, is an act of loyalty to your totality, a bitter medicine to force a change of course. Your dream life is the trickster's main stage. Dreams in which you are naked in public, late for an important exam, or in which mocking and ambiguous figures appear, are classic manifestations. The dream of being naked is not about shame, but about the need to shed your false persona. The dream of the exam you didn't study for speaks to the anxiety of living up to external standards, instead of following your inner wisdom. The trickster figures are the archetype itself, inviting you to a dialogue. Pay attention also to who or what deeply irritates you in the outer world. That person who seems chaotic, irresponsible, and breaks all the rules, but who somehow seems to get by. They may be a projection of your own repressed trickster. The intensity of your irritation is proportional to the intensity with which you deny that same energy within yourself. The external world becomes a mirror, showing you the part of yourself that is crying out for integration. Finally, a sudden eruption of chaotic creativity or Irresistible desire to play and do something useless and spontaneous is the trickster manifesting. In his positive pole, it is the urge to abandon the to-do list and spend the afternoon drawing, dancing, or simply wandering aimlessly. Heeding these impulses is not laziness. It is feeding a vital part of your psyche. Recognizing these signs requires a shift in perception. From seeing these events as failures to be corrected to seeing them as messages to be deciphered. The chaos knocking at your door is not an enemy. It is a messenger, and he only shouts when his whispers have been ignored for too long. Recognizing the trickster's presence is the first step. The second, and more challenging, is integration. To integrate does not mean to become the trickster, but to establish a conscious and functional relationship with this energy. It is about giving the inner trickster a space to play and work, so he doesn't have to tear down the whole house to be noticed. One of the most powerful tools for this is the practice of conscious play. The psychoanalyst D.W. Winnicott stated that it is in playing, and only in playing, that the individual, child or adult, is able to be creative and to use the whole personality. Set aside time in your life for activities that have no productive purpose: drawing, dancing, singing, writing nonsense, making up stories. This space of play is the trickster's sacred playground. It is where he can express himself freely, releasing tension and generating, as a byproduct, insights and creative ideas that can be applied to other areas of your life. Another fundamental technique is dialogue with the shadow, through active imagination, a method developed by Jung. Find a quiet place, close your eyes, and invite the figure of your inner trickster to appear. He may emerge as a person, an animal, or a mythical creature. Do not judge his appearance. Ask him questions. What do you want from me? Why are you sabotaging my plans? What do you need? Listen to the answers without censorship. This dialogue creates a bridge between the conscious ego and the archetypal energy, transforming a blind internal conflict into a conscious negotiation. The goal is to find a middle ground, an agreement where the trickster's needs can be met constructively. Practicing conscious, low-stakes rule-breaking is also a way to feed the trickster. This doesn't mean committing crimes or hurting people. It means challenging your own rigid routines and habits. Take a different route to work. Eat dessert before dinner. Wear an outfit you wouldn't normally wear. Speak an honest but kind truth when the expectation was polite silence. These small acts of symbolic rebellion send a message to your unconscious that you are willing to be more flexible, lessening the trickster's need to provoke major ruptures. Developing a sense of humor about yourself is perhaps the most important daily practice. When you make a mistake, instead of criticizing yourself harshly, try to find the comical side of the situation. Learn to laugh at your own quirks, contradictions, and failures. This deflates the power of the tyrannical superego and aligns you with the liberating perspective of the trickster. Humor is the alchemy that transforms the lead of error into the gold of wisdom. Finally, creative expression is the ultimate channel for the trickster's energy. Writing, painting, composing music, acting any art form allows the chaos of the unconscious to be shaped into a symbolic form. Art is the safe space where the destructive can become creative, where pain can become beauty, and where paradox can be expressed without the need to be resolved. By giving a voice and a form to your inner trickster through art, you honor and integrate him, transforming him from a hidden saboteur into your most powerful creative ally. Integration is an ongoing process, a dance that lasts a lifetime. It requires vigilance, humility, and above all, the courage to not have all the answers. We arrive, at last, not at a conclusion, but at a threshold. The journey through the domains of the trickster leads us to the great secret of psychological alchemy, the coniunctio oppositorum, the union of opposites. The ultimate goal of individuation is not the victory of light over darkness, of order over chaos, of the hero over the trickster. This dualistic view is the source of our inner conflict. The goal is the transcendence of duality through integration, the realization that these opposites are the two hands of a single God, the two wings necessary for the soul's flight. The final dance is not a battle, but a sacred marriage. It is the moment when the ego, our inner hero, after having its arrogance shattered and its rigidity softened by the trickster's mischief, finally turns to its shadow, not with a sword, but with an invitation to dance. He recognizes that the trickster's spontaneity, creativity, and wisdom are precisely the qualities he lacks, and the trickster, in turn, upon being recognized and honored, no longer needs to be purely destructive. His chaotic energy can be channeled in service of life, guided by the consciousness and purpose of the ego. From this union, a new psychic entity is born, what Jung called the self, our regulating center, the totality of our being. The self encompasses contradiction. It is capable of being serious and laughing, of building and deconstructing, of following the rules and breaking them when necessary. A person who lives from this center is psychologically resilient, creative, and free. They are no longer thrown from one extreme to the other, but have learned to walk the razor's edge between opposites. They have found the axis mundi, the world's axis, within themselves. This integration is reflected in a life of radical authenticity. The person no longer lives to meet external expectations or to conform to an idealized persona. They live from their own paradoxical truth. They can be a rigorous scientist in their laboratory and a chaotic artist in their studio. They can be a compassionate leader who uses humor to diffuse conflicts. They become a wise fool, someone whose depth is expressed with lightness and whose freedom is not irresponsible, but is in service of a higher purpose. This final dance is an ongoing process, not a permanent state. There will be times when order will try to dominate, and times when chaos will threaten to swallow us. The task is to keep returning to the center, to keep mediating the dialogue between the parts. It is the practice of holding the tension of the opposites until a third thing, a new and creative solution, can emerge. It is the most difficult and most rewarding work a human being can undertake. Therefore, the final message of the trickster is not a call to anarchy, but an invitation to wholeness. He challenges us to expand our definition of who we are, to embrace the parts of ourselves that frighten and confuse us, and to discover that it is precisely in these dark and chaotic depths that our greatest treasure, our deepest vitality, and our most authentic freedom reside. The dance has begun. The music is playing. Do you accept the invitation?